Welcome back to another episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update, our series that keeps you updated with our ever-changing industry. For those of you that have been watching the series for a while now, you know how this goes, but for those of you that are new, welcome. We'll be covering the latest in manufacturing, packaging, coding, sustainability, and much more. I'm your host, Alexa, and today we'll discuss topics ranging from RFK Jr.'s MAHA report raising alarms about the safety of American food, vaccines, and prescription drugs, to a brewing tomato trade dispute between the U.S. and Mexico. We'll also explore a federal lawsuit challenging the USDA's effort to collect personal data from SNAP recipients, and wrap up with a federal court decision blocking President Trump's sweeping Liberation Day tariffs. And starting off, in a significant development, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. unveiled the Make America Healthy Again, known as the MAHA Report, aiming to address pressing health concerns in the United States. While its title suggests a bold health initiative, the fallout from its release has left many confused, frustrated, and asking serious questions. The MAHA report is intended to be a sweeping assessment of the state of American health, with a particular focus on the rise of chronic illness, especially among children. It opens by criticizing the U.S. food system, alleging that ultra-processed foods are contributing to what Kennedy describes as a nationwide health crisis. One of the major recommendations calls for the National Institute of Health to conduct a formal study on the long-term health effects of these processed foods. Kennedy also expresses concerns over the role of agricultural chemicals, claiming that many pesticides in our food supply have not been properly studied outside of industry-backed research. Another major focus of the report centers around prescription practices, especially for children. Kennedy argues that the American healthcare system is too quick to medicate young people, calling for a reevaluation of pharmaceutical guidelines. He also questions the influence of pharmaceutical companies over regulatory bodies, suggesting that commercial interests are often prioritized over public health outcomes. Now this is where things take a sharp turn. Despite the sweeping claims and proposals within the report, the data behind it appears at best inconsistent, and at worst outright fabricated. Journalists and researchers quickly discovered that many of the studies cited in the report either don't exist or were misrepresented. In some cases, citations included links to papers that were never published or referenced researchers who have no record of ever working in the field. This triggered widespread suspicion that portions of the report may have been generated or heavily assisted by artificial intelligence. The structure of some paragraphs, repeated sentence patterns, and inaccuracies suggest that Kennedy's team may have used AI to compile these sections, although this has not been officially confirmed. To make matters more complicated, the authorship of the report remains undisclosed. Kennedy has not identified the individuals or organizations responsible for its research and writing. This lack of transparency has only fueled the backlash, leading many to question how such a report made it through the Department of Health and Human Services without proper review. In fact, the White House has since acknowledged formatting errors in the document and has promised revisions, though it stood by Secretary Kennedy and insisted the core messages were still valid. But the fallout didn't stop at formatting errors. The most controversial move to come out of the report was Kennedy's unilateral announcement to remove COVID-19 vaccines from the CDC's immunization schedule for healthy children and pregnant women. The CDC was reportedly not consulted prior to this announcement, and leading health experts have denounced the decision as politically motivated and medically irresponsible. Public health leaders say this could set a dangerous precedent, especially if major vaccine recommendations are changed without scientific consensus or coordination between agencies. On the agricultural front, many farmers and producers are alarmed by the way the report frames pesticide use. While Kennedy's narrative paints a picture of chemical overexposure and corporate malpractice, farming advocates argue that it ignores the stringent safety measures and reviews that already exist. They worry that this kind of rhetoric could damage consumer trust in American-grown produce and lead to sweeping regulations based on shaky evidence. In the end, the MAHA report, which was meant to unite Americans around a bold new vision for health, has sparked more division than clarity. While its core concern about the health of American children is valid and urgent, the credibility of its data and secrecy of its authorship and the lack of coordination with key agencies have undermined its impact. What was framed as a science-backed initiative has quickly morphed into a political and public relations mess. Moving on. Let's talk about the latest escalation in the long-running tomato trade dispute between the US and Mexico, an issue that once again heating up both politically and economically. In April of this year, the U.S. Department of Commerce announced that it would withdraw from the 2019 tomato suspension agreement with Mexico. This move reopens the door for the U.S. to impose a 21% anti-dumping duty on Mexican fresh tomato imports, with enforcement set to begin on July 14th. The department cited concerns that Mexican growers were selling tomatoes at prices unfairly below market value, a practice commonly known as dumping. To understand how we got here, we need to look back. The dispute traces back to the 1990s, when the U.S. first launched an anti-dumping investigation into Mexican tomato exports. That led to a suspension agreement in 1996, which was renewed and revised multiple times over the years. The most recent version, signed in 2019 during President Trump's administration, was a response to a prior threat to impose a 17.5% tariff. At the time, that agreement was seen as a way to ease trade tensions while still protecting domestic growers. But with the latest development, the stakes are high. The U.S. currently imports roughly $2 billion worth of fresh tomatoes from Mexico every year. Those imports don't just fill grocery store shelves, they support thousands of American jobs and help stabilize consumer prices through year-round availability. Now, with a 21% duty looming, consumers could see price hikes at the checkout, and businesses that rely on these imports may face major disruptions. Experts are voicing concern. Economists Andrew Mohammed and Luis Rivera, both of whom focus on agricultural trade, stress that these imports are critical to the U.S. economy. In their words, Mexican tomatoes provide consistent supply, competitive pricing, and significant job support across the supply chain. They warn that restricting imports could upset that balance, especially given that domestic growers may not have the capacity to meet national demand alone. And beyond the economic impact, there's the potential for a diplomatic fallout. With this tariff in play, trade tensions between the U.S. and Mexico could worsen, possibly triggering retaliatory actions and further complicating cross-border relations. So while this move may be aimed at protecting U.S. tomato producers, it's one with broad ripple effects, economic, political, and international. As the July 14th deadline approaches, all eyes will be on how both governments respond and what it means for consumers and the produce aisle. In a significant legal development, privacy and hunger relief organizations, along with several Supplement Nutrition Assistance Program recipients from SNAP, have filed a lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Agriculture, known as the USDA. The plaintiffs allege that the USDA violated federal privacy laws by mandating states and vendors to submit 5 years' worth of personal data from SNAP applications and enrollees. This data includes names, birth dates, addresses, and social security numbers. The lawsuit, filed in Washington, D.C., asserts that this data collection effort disregards long-standing privacy protections and exploits vulnerable citizens. Daniel Zabel, an attorney with the National Student Legal Defense Network, emphasized that the legal action aims to ensure the government does not exploit its most vulnerable citizens by disregarding established privacy safeguards. The Electronic Privacy Information Center and Mason Incorporated, a Jewish response to hunger, joined 4 SNAP recipients in bringing the lawsuit. This data collection initiative stems from an executive order signed by President Donald Trump on March 20th, directing agencies to ensure unfettered access to comprehensive data from all state programs to combat waste, fraud, and abuse by eliminating information silos. Following this order, the USDA, in collaboration with the Department of Government Efficiency, requested states and electronic benefit vendors to provide the specified data. The USDA warned that failure to comply could trigger non-compliance procedures. Some states have already complied with the request. For instance, Alaska has submitted the personal information of over 70,000 residents. Other states, such as Iowa, have indicated plans to turn over the information. The lawsuit seeks a judicial declaration that the USDA's data collection is unlawful in order for the destruction of any personal information already obtained, and an injunction preventing the agency from penalizing states that refuse to comply. SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, is a federal program that provides food assistance to over 42 million Americans. While the federal government funds 100% of the food benefits, states are responsible for determining eligibility, issuing benefits, and covering administrative costs. Consequently, states possess extensive personal information about SNAP applicants and their dependents, including financial, medical, housing, and tax data. This lawsuit underscores the ongoing tension between federal efforts to enhance program efficiency and the imperative to protect individual privacy rights. As the case progresses, it will be essential to monitor how the court balances these competing interests and the potential implications for data privacy in federal assistance programs. In a sweeping legal decision with major implications for U.S. trade policy, a federal court has ruled that President Donald Trump overstepped his authority in attempting to impose a broad set of tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. The ruling blocks his proposed Liberation Day tariffs, which aim to dramatically reshape America's trade landscape by slapping a 10% blanket tariff on most imported goods. The ruling, issued by the U.S. Court of International Trade in Manhattan, came in response to legal challenges brought by small business groups and multiple states, including Oregon. They argued that the plan not only violated the Constitution, but also threatened to destabilize the U.S. economy. The court agreed with a three-judge panel, stating unequivocally that the IEEPA does not authorize the president to regulate imports in this manner. The executive order signed by Trump on April 2nd of this year, under the name Liberation Day, claimed to address economic imbalances and alleged national security threats stemming from large trade deficits with countries like China and the members of the European Union. The administration argued that the U.S. trade deficit, which stood at $773.4 billion in 2023, represented a strategic vulnerability and justified immediate executive action. But in their ruling, the judges were firm. The opinion reads, while the president may act under the IEEPA to block financial transactions and freeze assets in response to foreign threats, the statute does not permit the imposition of tariffs on goods as a form of emergency economic regulation. The IEEPA, passed in 1977, grants the executive branch broad powers during declared national emergencies to regulate international commerce, particularly in response to security threats. However, the court clarified that those powers are limited to actions such as asset freezes, not tariff setting, which remains the constitutional responsibility of Congress. The blocked orders would have gone far beyond traditional tariff frameworks. The plan called for a flat 10% duty on nearly all imported products and additional penalty tariffs targeting nations with substantial trade surpluses. According to administration documents, that would have included a 15% tariff on Chinese goods and a 12% tariff on imports from Germany, France, and Japan. Critics argued that such a move would raise costs across entire industries, from manufacturing to retail, and provoke retaliatory tariffs from major trade partners. The economic reactions to the court's ruling was swift. U.S. stock futures surged following the announcement, with the S&P 500 jumping over 1.3% in after-hours trading. Oil prices also edged higher, and the dollar gained strength in currency markets as investors breathed a sigh of relief that a potential trade war escalation had been halted. Business groups applauded the decision. The National Federation of Independent Businesses, known as the NFIB, one of the plaintiffs in the case, issued a statement saying, "Our members rely on stable, lawful trade practices. The Liberation Day tariffs would have caused significant harm to small businesses and consumers alike." At the same time, the Trump campaign has indicated it plans to appeal the ruling, potentially setting up a major legal battle that could reach the U.S. Supreme Court. Trump himself, speaking at a campaign rally shortly after the ruling, called the court's decision a disgrace and vowed to take this all the way. While the court's ruling blocks the use of IEEPA for these tariffs, it does not impact Trump's prior use of other trade tools like Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, which he previously used to levy duties on steel, aluminum, and autos during his first term. But even with those tools, legal experts note that future administrations may now face tighter scrutiny on how they justify broad trade actions. This decision now becomes a defining moment in the broader debate over presidential power and trade authority. With more than $3.8 trillion in goods imported into the U.S. last year, the scale and reach of tariffs like these would have reshaped pricing, supply chains, and global relationships. And while the issue is far from over, the message from the courts is clear. Even in the name of emergency powers, the president cannot act without boundaries. This episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update is brought to you by our SNEED-Pack handheld label applicator, the ultimate solution for fast, clean, and precise label application. Whether you're working with promotional tags, brand trademarks, barcodes, or QR codes, this lightweight and portable tool handles everything from rectangular and round labels to even the most irregular shapes. It's perfect for cartons, boxes, parcels, fruit, and more. It eliminates crooked, bubbled, or torn labels so your packaging always looks polished and professional. Simple, reliable, and efficient, it's time to make the switch. Like always, stay tuned to our next episode of SNEED-CAST Industry Update, and make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell down below to stay up to date with all of our great updates, and also make sure to let us know what topics you'd like to see us talk about here on the show. We look forward to hearing from you all. Bye, everyone.